Hi, welcome to Real Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager.
And I'm Brian Michael. Ooh, we got an extra special episode for you today. This is an episode I've been pushing and pushing for Miss Angela and I to do, and I finally got my wish because eventually we run out of ideas and mine get used. And so this is an episode that we're actually going to be talking about some of the extracurricular activities that we do in terms of our film nerddom, I should say. And when Angela and I aren't watching movies, sometimes we're texting back and forth, and Angela sends me articles by some of the people that write, and so I have to read, which takes me forever. And so then I just counter by sending her videos from YouTube, or I talk about different podcasts that I listen to about different aspects of other films that were like, or different things that are going on in Hollywood.
I just realized you opened it that when we're not watching movies, and then you went on to describe all these things related to movies. So what he's saying is when we're not watching movies, we're reading, listening, and watching things about movies.
Yes.
So yeah, we have a life.
Well, and I want to put the disclaimer up ahead that we try not to read any of those things of the films that we review on the show because we don't want them to influence us sometimes afterwards. And sometimes that can be really frustrating because then you listen to something or read something later and you're like, oh, why didn't I think of that, or why didn't I brought that up? That's a really good point. And that's usually when we start texting back and forth. Dang it. So we just want to kind of go over some of those things because I know that, again, if Angela is going to be torturing other people with some of these long articles that I have to read, I might as well be you guys, our viewers at home. So I want to start off with my podcast because there's a lot of them that I watch. The first thing I would recommend is if you don't listen to podcasts, I would recommend finding an app that does it. I use Podbean, and the reason I like it is because I can speed up or I can slow it down. Because if you listen to someone talk like me, you may want to slow it down a little bit so that you can actually comprehend what's going on. If you listen to something that's from NPR and it's a podcast and they all talk, I have to speed it up because I will lose my concentration. It has to be a certain speed. I will warn you, if you do listen to it at a fast rate, and I get up to 1.5, the rest of the world really slows down afterwards and it's really annoying. Or when your friend hops in the car and your podcast is going, she goes, oh my God, what is this?
Yeah.
You've done it a couple times. Oh my God, Brian, stop it. Oh my God, how can you understand what they're saying? It gives me a headache. So I would first of all recommend that because being able to adjust with the speed is really nice, or the volume. And don't do it while you're driving. But the first one I want to talk about is Now Playing, or the Now Playing podcast. And what I love about this one is it's Arnie, Stuart, and Jacob, three childhood friends who actually have worked in and out of the filmmaking industry and are big-time fans. Some of them you would consider nerds, and they also have some of their friends and spouses come in and they review films. What they do is they'll review series. So if you want to listen to them talk about all of the Marvel movies, they do that. All the Stephen King adaptations, they do that. All the Children of the Corn films, they do it. I haven't listened to those ones, but they'll do it. And I like that because they're completionists, and they are always curious if they like this film, or if this film is so bad but it does well, and they make another one, well, the curiosity just gets to them, and so they'll go on and do this. They'll do it with big time movies, or they'll do it with smaller films as well, and I like that. They like to look into the cultural significance of sequels, or at least are curious enough to watch, to study, and review. You can subscribe. You can also subscribe with Patreon and get more. They have different series that if you're, depending on the level of subscription that you do, that you pay the monthly, you'll get unlocked other kind of reviews they have, like the Aliens one, which I really want to pay to get. But this one I like about it is just a conversation between friends. Sometimes they bring up past things and, oh yeah, I remember this. But with usually have the three, one is a novice, even when it's Star Wars, they're like, yeah, I saw them once when I was a kid. And then they'll have the other one who's like kind of, I've seen the Star Wars. I know who Princess Leia is. I can name all the characters and I've seen them more than once. And then they have the total nerd that's like, yeah, I own the action figures. I have all of the 5 or 6 different variations that they've released. And now I've got this other one on order. And so that's what's really fun about it. And they can really dive into it. And they talk about the pre-production, the actual production of the film, and then what they saw and what they think of it.
Okay.
A lot of fun. You listen to like 2 seconds of it and you went, those are fanboys. And it hurt my feelings. That was like 3 years ago.
Oh, gosh.
That's okay.
He still remembers everything I say 3 years ago. Wow. Okay. I don't remember that, but I'm sure it probably sounds like something I would say.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, we're going back and forth?
Was that what you want to do?
Oh, sure. I guess so. I thought you were going to just talk about podcasts.
No, well, I can keep going, but...
Okay. So I was going to talk about Well, so for one thing, a lot of the folks that I follow through social media, primarily Twitter, because that's where all the writers are. And so they even call it film Twitter because it's become its own little weird incestuous sort of like group where film people just follow other film people and they argue about things that nobody else cares about. So it'd be something like, let's all argue about the lighting in the movie Lighthouse or something, like, I mean, yeah, it goes circular, and regular people would be like, oh my gosh, this is craziness. So there's kind of two groups of film critics that I follow on film Twitter, and one is what I would call more established places from more established publications. So New York Times, A.O. Scott, and Manohla Dargis are actually really, really fun to follow on Twitter because they're a lot more loose than they are in their reviews in the New York Times. So they'll let loose with some F-bombs and get into arguments with other film critics, and they're a lot of fun. There are also two critics that I actually respect a lot and agree with their opinion a lot. Another critic that I really like is Justin Chang from the Los Angeles Times. He's a younger critic who I think he's just a good writer. He has a lot of really great opinions. We film snobs, or me especially, I do like to read other critics, even though you should really only be paying attention to what we're saying. These are some that... And then on Ebert Voices, there's two critics that they have a ton of writers on Ebert Voices, but the two that I really like, one is Odie Henderson, who is just really, really fun. He was the guy that launched the big campaign against Green Book last year, and he's often calling...
he was so successful.
Yeah, not very successful. But he's often calling Hollywood on a lot of racism and other things that he finds, offensive. But he's also really, really fun writer. And Thomas Lafley, she's another critic on Ebert Voices who's writing I really enjoy. Glenn Kenny, who used to be the chief film critic for Premiere Magazine back in the day, and you youngsters may not remember Premiere, but back in the day, Premiere was the film magazine,
cool.
Bar none. Glenn Kenny was their chief film critic the whole time that magazine was in existence, at least the whole time that I read it. I wouldn't say the whole time since the beginning, but it eventually went away, and he's now a freelancer. So he writes for the New York Times as well as for Ebert Voices and lots of other publications. He also has a blog called Some Came Running, and he's also working on a book about Martin Scorsese. So he's really active on Twitter. So he's a lot of fun to follow. So those are some of the folks that are more established. When we come back from this podcast break, I'll talk about some of the more out there people.
Okay. So the next one I want to talk about the podcast would be Show Me the Meaning, and this is by Wisecrack. And if you watch any of the Wisecrack stuff that they have on YouTube as well, they're pretty darn smart. These guys go into deeper meaning and significance of films. In fact, there's a lot of them, a few of them that are philosophy majors or took philosophy. And so when they talked about Toy Story 4, they would mention that Jean-Paul Sartre was a philosopher, talking about how you first exist and then you create yourself with there's no pre-chosen existence, that you're radically free. And then they talked about how that applied toward Toy Story 4 because these are pre-programmed items that now have becoming like human, and so they have that radical freeness that you would have as a person, and so they're pretty much just making Pinocchio. But then they were talking about the existence of God, and they were like, well, these toys actually have a God because Forky was created by a God, a child. So what they're saying is that God is a child, and that God is innocent, or that God is a bumbling fool. And so they really get into some things where I kind of go,
very philosophical.
I start to smoke. My head will start to smoke, and sometimes I have to I've got to pause or I'll rewind and go, wait, what? What are we talking about? And so I think that's really fascinating. And they're like, well, yeah, there is and then they still are overwhelmed by how Forky was trash. That's all that Forky was, and how interesting a story that would have been to follow that along a little bit more in terms of his inner thinking there. But I love that they have that, or that even that Gabby, the character in Toy Story 4, has a book of how you're supposed to feel and act. And is that their own religion? They all come with their own little pamphlet, their own little instruction manual of how you're supposed to live your life and what you're supposed to do. And so, sometimes they really dive into it. And even if it's a film that you don't necessarily like, you can listen to it and just kind of go, oh my God, and they just really, and then sometimes they're like, okay, hold on, wait, we're not going to bring in Freud just yet, and they'll talk a thing out into, just pound it out and then hop on something else and really go with it. And those ones are much longer. The Now I'm Playing one I talked about, those are usually an hour, hour and a half, sometimes 2.5 hours, depending on what they're doing. And the Show Me the Meaning can be usually about over an hour or so. And I really enjoy that one, but it's
pretty heavy stuff.
Yes, it's very deep.
Do they usually only review those kind of more mainstream movies, or do they get into like art house ones as well?
They'll do other ones though, but they'll do more current films. So they'll have like the Joker.
So not classic
and
ones
like
as much.
No. Okay. Whereas the Now Playing, they'll go further back into some classic films, or at least Children of the Corn too.
Yeah.
Can't believe they did that one.
Yeah, that sounds like, well, someone's got to do it, I suppose, maybe.
Exactly.
So on film Twitter, I forgot to mention that there's actually some established critics that I follow who I don't agree with very often. I actually think it's really great to read people and follow people that you rarely agree with, just get a different perspective.
Yep.
So there's two critics in particular that I often take issue with. One is Richard Brody of the New Yorker, and he's very active on Twitter. He just often kind of rubs people the wrong way, and you can sort of see why. But I find him interesting. He's very intelligent, and his writing's very intelligent, but I often disagree with him. Another one is Stephanie Zatharick, who has been a long time. She's been around forever. Stephanie now works for Time, but she had Bohemian Rhapsody on her top 10 last year. So that's all I'll say about that and her taste. But
someone liked it.
Yes. Yeah. No. It's just. Yeah. When I saw that, I was like, wow. Okay. And then also on Film Twitter, I want to mention that some of the podcasts that you're probably going to be mentioning are actually really active on there and get into some things and have some debates even about their podcasts on Twitter. So Film Spotting is one of them that you're going to talk about. Another one is Little White Lies. Do you listen to that one?
No, I know of them. No, I don't have that one.
So they're very active, and it's also really interesting to follow a lot of what they're talking about. And then Casual Cinecast is another one that is a podcast that I follow on Twitter, that they have really interesting debates about movies. And a lot of these get more into, those three I think are a little bit more art housey, but they I don't know, I think I've seen some things particularly from Film Spotting on current mainstream movies as well. Okay, so looking at now some other folks that are writing about film and are very active on social media, but are not maybe as in established publications like New York Times. Mark Harris is actually someone I really enjoy following. He used to be the editor at Entertainment Weekly back when it was good, but unfortunately he's sort of freelance now. But he gets some pretty high-profile gigs. He's going to be doing all the Oscar coverage this year for Vanity Fair. But he's a very opinionated film writer, and he is openly gay, and he talks a lot about those issues and those portrayals in films. He was someone that came out really hard against Bohemian Rhapsody last year. He thought the film was homophobic, and there was a lot of controversy about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of debate about that because there were some people that loved it. So that was interesting. Alicia Malone is someone I love to follow. She used to, of course, work for your beloved Filmstruck and be a contributor to that. And now she's with TCM, and she is also an on-air presence for TCM, but she also is very active on.
Is she the Australian?
Yes. She's
they had a podcast that
she's very she's
she wrote
great.
A book.
Yeah. About women in film. Yeah. So she's very active in talking about women in film, but classic Hollywood stuff. She's always portraying. She always posts interesting things on Twitter, like just little trivia things about classic Hollywood that are really interesting. Another person who writes both about classic Hollywood as well as modern films is Farhan Nimi. I'm probably mispronouncing her name. She writes for Film Comment as well as Criterion, and she's also often on a lot of their commentary. So she's a kind of a film academic of a sort, but she's able to bring it down to a regular level. So she's super interesting, and she's always got great perspectives. She's the person that's on when Criterion Channel was doing their retrospective on Barbara Stanwyck. She came and talked about her career. And then A.A. Dowd, who is the film editor for AV Club. He's a lot of fun, and he's very opinionated as well, and a lot of fun to follow.
I'll go back to another podcast. You mentioned Film Spotting. Actually, Brian Knoll, a friend of the pod. That's a different podcast I listen to. A friend of the show actually told me about this one. It has Adam Kempenaar, and Josh Larson. And I don't always agree with them. It's based out of Chicago. I believe it's an NPR because I cranked that one up really fast. And they'll review new films. They'll always have a top 5 list, which... I love lists, and it's so interesting. And then they'll have people, they'll write in their list, and it starts a nice conversation. They'll have interviews on there, and then they have Massacre Theater, where you try to guess what movie it is while they try to reenact it. I hate that part, and I usually just skip it, even though Brian Knoll loves it. I cannot stand it. They are also a cousin of the Next Picture Show, which is another time. I'll talk about that one another day. But they do a lot of they'll also take on different series. Like right now, they're doing a bunch of contemporary Chinese films that they're not familiar with. And I always like that when they talk about a film or someone mentions it, like, oh wait, and they'll write it down, and eventually we'll get around to that one. And so the longer you listen to it, the more kind of payoff. They're like, oh yeah, remember episode 75? We talked about this. We're eventually going to be getting to that. They're also one of the ones that talked about American Beauty at 20. That movie is really different now, people. And if you haven't seen it or know anything about it, you might want to start looking that up because it's pretty mind-blowing how dated that movie is. Because I was like, American Beauty, I love that movie. It's not so good anymore. It doesn't hold up in today's standards. You know, when you have Disney Plus and it says that, you know, the lawyers put together the thing, this is just a reflection of the times. Yeah, that's what American Beauty is now, and it's only 20 years old. It's pretty sad. They also have a lot of polls that they take from their listeners, which is always really interesting. They have a lot of bets on the side, you know, saying, you know, they think that this one will win as opposed to this one, the different questions that they have polling on, which is a lot of fun. And so people will write in some really interesting answers. Actually, they have a lot of interactions with their listeners who are very intelligent. So, of course, I think because it's an NPR. So it's a lot of fun with that.
And what is the name of that one again? Sorry.
Film Spotting.
Oh, that's the Film Spotting one.
Film Spotting one. That one's a lot of fun. It's a good one. Now that one's also very lengthy, but there's usually some parts I usually have to skip. Certainly the interviews until after I've seen the film, then I go back and see it. And sometimes they review a movie right after they see it. They'll come in and go, "These are our first thoughts," which is terrifying to me. I would not want to do that.
Yeah, that'd be hard.
Right? So that one's a really good one. I highly recommend that one.
So I'm going to talk about some publications now that I read, and by publications, I mostly read almost all of these online with the exception of Film Comment, which is a magazine I do subscribe to. That's a must for any film lover. But then in addition to the New York Times and LA Times that I mentioned, reading their film sections, which are really still top notch. Ebert Voices, another great, Ebert Voices is still another really great place to go for good film coverage. And a couple others. Slate Magazine, which continues, which is an online magazine, continues for decades now to put out really good content. It's a chief film critic, Dana Stevens. She's really smart. I don't always agree with her, but I mean, she's a little bit higher, more of like a 60-40 split. But they're very, very intelligent film coverage and a lot of fun. And David Ehrlich with IndieWire, I want to mention him because he's a very divisive film person. You mentioned Brian Knoll. That's why I wanted to bring him up. Brian Knoll loves David Ehrlich and often agrees with him, and he thinks he's one of the best film critics out there. Another friend of ours, Nathaniel, who works at Salem Cinema, he dislikes David Ehrlich so much that he's actually got his name blocked on Twitter as one of the things he blocks because he comes up so much too because he comments on other people's things constantly. He's very active on social media, and so it's almost hard. Even if you weren't following him directly, you would see his comments all the time because he comments on other people's things. And so David Ehrlich is most famous recently for championing the movie Paddington 2. He was the person who literally went for an Oscar campaign for that movie. He goes that full film, out. Yeah. Oh yeah. Something about that movie just really touched him.
Oh yeah.
And he always puts together a visual essay every year of his favorite movies of the year. So he puts it together as like a video slideshow, so it's not a bunch of writing. So people that don't want to read can see it. He does it through clips and he edits it together, and it's very fun and sophisticated. I don't always agree with him, but I love to see people get mad at him because he has a tendency to antagonize people and get into it with them. So.
Gosh, I don't know which one I want to talk about next. I'm going to slide into some YouTube stuff, and I'm going to go with the real nerdier things because that's kind of what I tend to go for. One of my favorite new channels is the Corridor Crew. It's actually growing really fast, and I think I've sent you a few links sometimes. And these are guys who do special effects for a living, and they sit on the couch.
I have watched a few of those.
And they watch good special effects, and they watch bad special effects in films. And sometimes there are good scenes in bad movies or bad scenes in good movies, whichever it is, and they'll sit and they'll break it down. Now, a lot of times we've seen movies with we all see movies with special effects, and we know sometimes when they're bad special effects, but do you know why they're bad special effects? It's always the lighting and the skin. But they'll break that down and show this is what it was, this is what was wrong, and of course they're not making fun of the film or the filmmakers because they usually know, well, except for producers, because they know usually it's either the budget or time constraints on poor special effects groups. But it's really interesting to sit there and then break it down and go, oh no, see look, the weightness here, the weightlessness here, or the reflection of the skin here, and they break it down and we're like, oh yeah, and actually at times they've given Michael Bay credit for having, even though there's a lot of stuff going on, but the way he would use his scale was correct. And so they said it's not very popular, but this is what's done right with this, and they kind of point things out, and I was like, okay, I'll give him that, and I like that. And then they have stuntmen come in. Ooh, and they've ruined a few movies for me. And they were like, oh, that does suck. And so they'll have a stuntman come in and explain how this happens, why this works. And like, oh no, here's like The Last Jedi. Here's this great scene where they have the big lightsaber fight. And he's like, no. They pause it and he goes, what's this guy doing? What's going on here? And they point these things out. And you're right, because these actors, their timing was far behind, and they'll show it against something else where they have like stunt people doing things, and they show how crisp and how they compare them. And it's really fascinating because mean, honestly, films are a lot of special effects and it's a lot of stunt crew. So it's really interesting to get that education and learn those things. And they're a bunch of nerds and they love those things. And it's a fun thing. I can't help it.
It's an expertise level, yeah. So tell me about another YouTube.
So another one I have would be The Take. And I love this station because every time it comes out, it's extremely well written. It's very, very thorough. And they'll take on like Legally Blonde and the history of the dumb blonde. Where does this come from? And they've said the first time it's been noticed was in 1775 in a French play where a character was known for being of great beauty, blonde, and dumb. And then they'll go on with James Mansfield, and of course she was the bombshell. And there was the 3 different types of blondes, where there's the icy blonde, like in a lot of Hitchcock films, the blonde bombshell, and there's the dumb blonde. And all of them are, of course, seen as objects and can be purchased. And what blew me away about this show, was that it was just written by 2 women. Not because they're women, it was just that it was 2 people were able to put these essays are like 20, 25 minutes long, and they're so in-depth, and I thought for sure this was like a room full of people, whether they're men, women, or aliens or whatever. I was so blown away, but it's just 2 women that just sit there and do this, and I was, wow. They'll take on, they'll also have, it's directed by Steven Spielberg. It's a Steven Spielberg film, and then they'll go through and they'll break down our director's common themes, their common looks, their common angles.
Certain shots that are
throughout the films.
The Take?
The Take. I love this one. They'll even do television.
Like one I'd like more.
Yeah, they'll do even television. If you like Game of Thrones, they really go through that I really enjoy. And so, that one I always look forward to when it pops up on. You subscribe when you look at YouTube and you go to your subscriptions.
Oh,
and
like
the new
you
ones
should do
pop
for
up
our
there.
show right now.
For our show, always hit subscribe or you hit the little bell and it'll notify you when a new episode is posted. That one I absolutely, Forrest Gump and the Myth of America, how the Big Lebowski became a lifestyle. Just different essays like that are just fantastic. I love that. Do you want me to talk about another one or are you going?
I'll do my last part, which is, so I've talked a lot about film critics, because of course we love film criticism, we're film critics, but I do want to touch on some other people I follow on social media for their film expertise, actual filmmakers, and some of them, and these are the ones I picked are ones who are not just on there to promote their stuff, because there's a lot of filmmakers that are on social media and they're just like, hey, I've got this new thing out and it's great, and they don't really have anything interesting to say. These are people that are out there really giving opinions, getting into the discourse, interacting with fans. So Sean Baker, one of my favorite filmmakers, he's very active on Twitter, and he even liked some of my tweets, which always made me super excited.
That's right, yeah.
I know. And so he directed the Florida Project in Tangerine, and he's very active on there. He is a huge champion of underground and cult films, and so if you want to learn more about them, he talks about films that I've never heard of before in my life, and he'll find some really obscure Italian, crazy, gory horror film that you've never heard before. So great for that. Barry Jenkins, also and just seems like a wonderful person. He just seems like someone you would love to hang out and have a drink with on Twitter. Edgar Wright is another one who is awesome on Twitter. He gets into it with people. He's super political too. So be, warned if you don't, like liberal politics, but he's also a lot of fun. And then Judd Apatow. Also very political, but also just really thoughtful in the things he comments about on Twitter. And then I don't know if he counts as a filmmaker or not, but I'm going to mention because he talks about movies a lot, but Patton Oswalt, the comedian, and I think he's sort of a filmmaker and he's in a lot of films. He has a lot of really intelligent opinions about movies and likes to get in and with people. And so he especially was really funny when he got into it recently about the whole Scorsese versus Marvel Comics thing. And he was just like, he's a comic book fan.
Yeah.
And he was just like, I don't care. Scorsese can do whatever he wants. That's basically where he left it. So anyway,
the last one I want to talk about will be a podcast, and it's The Business or the Hollywood Breakdown. And this is done by Kim Masters, who is just one of the great voices that's made for AM radio and or podcasts. I love her. I only speed her up a little bit, but she works for the Hollywood Reporter, and it's Oh no, I didn't write it down. Oh yeah, KCRW, which is an NPR station in California. They have a lot of great podcasts, and she'll talk about the business side of what's going on in Hollywood. So if you're wondering about knowing all of the things that are going on behind the scenes with Comcast and the old owner or the owner and his daughter and trying to, because he's getting disabled, it's really, really fascinating stuff. Mm-hmm. And so she'll also interview a lot of filmmakers and does a really in-depth, great interviews. And even if it's whether the Hollywood Reporter broke a story or if it's Variety magazine, they'll sit and discuss it. And she'll usually bring in one of her colleagues on, and they'll have a great discussion about that. But I love that it's what Entertainment Weekly used to kind of be. Gosh, I missed it. And kind of the behind the scenes, as well as what's going to be happening that weekend and the effects of whatever has happened and how that's going to down the line affect everything in terms of our viewing. So, well, that was
we did
that
it.
made me so happy. I've been wanting to do this episode for so very, very long. I love the different things on YouTube
and we'll
podcasts.
post links to all of these podcasts
Certainly.
and blogs and different things on our website.
Be sure to support them. Be sure to support them also out there. And we just want to thank our amazing crew, our fantastic sponsors, and you for watching out there. Have a great day and great movies.